Welcome back. We are now on air with an air quality policy briefing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Sacramento Metro Chamber's Cap to Cap Air Quality Policy Briefing. I'm Heidi Sanborn, a member of the SMUD Board of Directors, and we're delighted to sponsor today's briefing on air quality. SMUD has benefited greatly from our longstanding support of the Metro Chamber and its Cap to Cap program. And today's topic of air quality is particularly timely from our perspective. Climate change, which exacerbates poor air quality, is at the heart of why the SMUD board adopted the 2030 Zero Carbon Plan this spring, the most ambitious decarbonization plan of any large electric utility in the country. Even as one of the greenest utilities in the country, we still rely on natural gas for about half of our power generation. We have 5 gas power plants and plan to close 2 of them by 2025, which are the smallest, least efficient, and are in our under-resourced neighborhoods. We plan to refuel the other 3 plants with cleaner fuels, such as hydrogen. Our investments in the electrification of the transportation and building sectors are vital to the success of the Zero Carbon Plan, since vehicles and buildings are the 2 largest emitters of greenhouse gases in California. In fact, SMUD's transportation electrification goals are even more aggressive than those in the governor's executive order and the mayor's climate commission goals for the state and the region. As SMUD's power mix gets cleaner each year with renewable resources replacing carbon-based fuels, increased electrification will lead to better air quality and improved health outcomes, such as a reduction in childhood asthma. When I go out in the community and explain why SMUD is working to be decarbonized by 2030, I emphasize the need for collective action and prioritizing the use of carrots, not sticks. We realize we can't accomplish this goal alone. We need the buy-in of all our residential and business customers, elected officials, local business groups, nonprofits, technology companies, startups, car manufacturers, solar companies, and basically everyone. We're committed to full transparency and to making sure that every customer, including those living in historically underserved communities, reap the benefits of this collective effort. We want clean air quality for everyone in the greater Sacramento region. And it's key to attracting new businesses. Who wants to tell their employees that we're going to move to the 6th worst air quality basin in the country? We want to clean our air to help attract new businesses to the region. So now to help us demystify air quality policy and share the actions we all can take to improve air quality, we have a distinguished panel of experts. First, David Yang, the program supervisor with the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality District. Then Binyo Abram, the project manager with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Mike Cao, executive director of the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, and Yolo County Supervisor Don Saylor, who's a board member of Valley Clean Energy. And I'll be doing Q&A at the end of their talks. And so you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat, which I'll look at while they speak. And I'd like to turn it over now to Eric White, the Air Pollution Control Officer for the Placer County Air Pollution Control District, to provide further context for today's discussion. Eric, please take it away.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for all the panelists who are joining us this afternoon. You know, I have been told that of all the environmental disciplines, air quality is perhaps the most challenging to navigate. It intersects everything we do, from climate change to health impacts, to really defining how we grow as a region, where industry can go, how we move through the region. And so we thought it would be great to try to connect all of those dots for you this afternoon and give you a flavor for how the regional air quality districts work with transportation planners here in the region to ensure that we grow successfully, we grow in a way that will leave something for future generations that is more efficient. And we start to really think about not only how do we expand our capacity and expand our transportation network here in the region, but start thinking about new ways in which we can move through the region, and then how advancing technologies like clean fuels, clean electricity are going to drive where we want to go. And then as we think about air quality, what is coming from the national level that's going to further drive the reductions that we need here locally. So with that, I think it's time to hand it over to David Yang, who's from the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District, who's going to kick off our discussion today. So David, look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Renee, we could put up the slides. I'm sorry, Adrian, if you could put up the slides.
He says, give him a moment. He's trying. Here we go.
All right. Oh, thank you, Eric, and thank you for this opportunity to present. My name is Dave Yang. I'm with Sacramento Air District, and I'll be presenting on air quality planning. Benu from SACOG will be covering transportation planning portion later on in this presentation. Next slide, please. So air quality planning is important in the second reason because it ensures that we continue to clean the air and make progress to meet the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, has set health-based standards, air quality standards for 6 particulate pollutants to protect human health. We are required by the Clean Air Act to show that we meet these standards. If we don't, we need to develop a state implementation plan, or SIP, to show how we will meet those standards. For the Sacramento regions, we are currently designated as non-attainment for ozone and PM 2.5. Our non-attainment area, known as the Sacramento Federal Non-Attainment Area, is shown on the map. And our planning efforts is a collaborative process with all air districts in the area, which are they're shown below. Our partners at SACOG, at the state or California Air Resources Board, and EPA. I just want to point out that on this map, this is mapped for air quality planning purposes, and SACOG serves a larger area. Next slide, please. So we have made progress in reducing air pollution in our region, but we will need to continue this progress to meet the standard. The chart on the left is our progress made for ozone, which shows a downward trend. However, we are not there yet. We are currently working on the plan to meet the 2015 ozone standard, which is shown in the blue line. The chart on the right is for the 24 hours PM 2.5 concentration, where it shows that we're at or around the standard. However, there are talks at the federal level to lower that the PM 2.5 standards. Also, these graphs do not include data that were impacted by wildfires in 2018, 2020. So with the wildfire data, we'll definitely be above the standards. But EPA has a mechanism in place where we can exclude the data, those data impacted by wildfires if needed. So next slide, please. This slide shows how lowering emissions is through a collaborative effort. It takes our partners at the federal and state levels to help get the reductions that we need. And this is done through different mechanisms by regulations, emission standards, permitting, incentives, and land use decisions. Next slide, please. So to show how we meet the standards, we put together a state implementation plan, or SIP. This plan shows where we're at and how we get to our end goal. Or to show where we're at, we look at the air quality data that we collect from our air monitoring sites. This is paired with our emission inventory, which lets us know where the emissions are coming from and how it's contributing to our air pollution problem, whether it's from mobile sources, stationary sources, or air-wise sources. We also forecast our future year emission inventory based on growth factors and how a specific sectors are affected or impacted by rules and regulations, so how they're being controlled in the future. We take that data in the emission inventory and run it through a model. Also in the modeling, we include activity data from SACOG, or which includes population growth and the change in vehicle miles travel. And then that model will tell us if we can attain the standard by the same year. If we can, then we won't need to commit to any additional control measures like how we did in our last plan, in our 2008 ozone plan, where we show that, you know, with the current measures in place, we will be able to attain by the attainment date. But if the model shows that we cannot attain, then we'll need to consider, we'll need to get the reductions to meet those, to meet the standard. And that means looking at control strategies from all sectors, looking at rules and regulations, any sort of long-term actions that we could put in place. And those will be commitments in the plan to help us reach attainment. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, our emission inventory shows the contribution of sources, the contribution of emissions from the different sources. I want to note that mobile sources, including on-road mobile sources like cars and trucks, plays a significant role in our region. So it's important that we need to continue to reduce emission from that sector. And this graph shows the emission inventory for NOx and for VOCs. Sorry. Next slide, please. So this leads us to the nexus between air quality and transportation planning, which is transportation conformity. Transportation conformity means that the proposed transportation activities will not make our air quality worse, won't cause any new violations, or delay us in meeting our attainment. So to do this, the SIP established motor vehicle emission budgets, which are the upper emission limits for our transportation projects. So transportation emissions can't exceed those limits. Motor vehicle emission budgets are based on vehicle activity data in the transportation plan, which SACOG would be talking more in a bit. That data is input into a modeling. The model tells us what can be allowed for the motor vehicle emission budgets. Once they're in the SIP, these budgets become effective when they are approved by EPA. Next slide, please. I just want to touch upon how SIP impacts business. So for us, for the second region, most source is what impacts us the most. As a district, we don't have regulatory authority over most sources, so we implement incentive programs to help reduce emissions by replacing dirty equipment. We also involve in land use planning, making suggestions to reduce and mitigate emissions from projects. Where we can't get emissions from most sources, then we'll need to look at other sectors, including station sources or businesses. If we fail to attain the standard, then the region may need to implement more control measures, looking at all sectors, including station sources, and there may be additional fees that may be implemented as well. We also have potential to lose federal transportation funding, so less funding into the region mean less growth. So meeting air quality standard is important to us all. And with that, I'll pass on to Benu with SACOG to talk more about transportation planning.
Thank you, David. That's a perfect segue to talk about transportation planning. I am Binu Abraham. I am the project manager for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy, or known as the MTPSCS, at SACOG. SACOG is the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, and we represent a 6-county region with 22 cities, about 11 transit agencies, and so on. So our air quality attainment is tied to how we grow and how we get around in the region. That's where our role at SACOG comes in. We are charged with developing the long-range transportation plan for the region. Think of it as a big ship. We know where we are today. We know where we need to get in 20 to 25 years. And the bigger the ship, the slower the change. So we at SACOG develop a plan to help us get from where we are today to where we should be in 20 to 25 years. So a very good place to start is at the beginning, which is, what is MTPSCS? Next slide, please. So MTPSCS, or as we lovingly call it, the plan, is a long-range plan that combines the land use strategies and transportation needs in our region, and come up with a variety of travel modes that will help our residents get from one place to the other. At the same time, give us cleaner air, give us different mobility, and make sure everybody is has a better access to jobs and housing and goods and services, and we conserve our open air and provide recreational opportunities. We do this update every 4 years because once we do the plan, things don't just stand still. Things are always evolving. So every 4 years, we revisit and see if we are on the right track, if there's something else that we need to consider, and so on. Why do we need a plan? We need a plan for several reasons. One of the best reason is that we have, as an MPO, we have to meet certain federal and state requirements. And having a plan helps us to meet all that requirement. One of the best examples of a federal and state requirement is meeting the air quality. The state has their own greenhouse gas emission targets that we need to meet, and the federal level, we have the air quality standards that we need to meet. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a 6-county region and total of 28 agencies. We need a united vision, a regional vision for its future, or we are just going to go around and around. So this MTP provides a vision that all the cities and counties can get behind and help us to get to our where we need to go. And finally, and most importantly, this provides us an opportunity to identify what our priorities are, and anytime we have a grant opportunity to be ready with a project, and so that we can get funding to grow our region in a sustainable manner. So next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide. Thank you. So every region is unique. How is Sacramento region unique from rest of the region? As a region, this map is a annual population growth compared to the rest of California. The pink line shows the annual population growth of Sacramento. If you look at the area, you can see that compared to the Bay Area and Los Angeles and San Diego, we and San Joaquin Valley are the 2 areas that are trending upward. We are having a lot of population growth, and it is not because of new job opportunities or anything. It's the population growth has shifted inland. So we are getting a lot of people who used to live in the Bay Area or in the coastal regions coming into Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley, probably because of the higher cost of housing and other regions. So what we need is to provide a balance of business and other opportunities to sustain this growth. Along with it, our population, just to give us an idea of, in 2000, we had a population of 1.9 million. In 2020, we have grown to over 2.5 million. Let's look at the demographics. Next slide, please. The demographic, the next slide, please. Thank you. So the demographic shows that in 2000, we had a majority of non-Hispanic white, and that was about 63%. And in 2019, this has come down to about 51%, and we are seeing an increase in growth in the Hispanic and the Asian community. That is unique to us. But let's look at the land use patterns now. Next slide. The demographic and the land use are both unique to our region. While we are a growing region, something to keep in mind is where we are going to house these people and what that pattern will be in the future. This impacts how, when, and where they will travel, and what type of business and service we will need to provide so that the people can have a good quality of life. The 80% of our region's land use is classified as rural, and 20% is urban. But if you look at the housing side, 90% of this housing is located in urban areas, and less than 10% is in the rural areas. What does that mean? Next slide, please. That means our land use and housing patterns will determine how people are getting around in the region. This is another unique challenge we have, our travel patterns. The graph shows the daily vehicle miles traveled per capita. In the blue line that you see is the travel pattern or the vehicle miles traveled in the San Francisco region. The yellow line is the Los Angeles. The green line is San Diego, and the pink is Sacramento. Everything else is combined together and rolled into that black line. You can see that Sacramento and second followed by San Diego has the most vehicle miles traveled per capita. You may not think that there's a lot of difference in this, but remember this is per capita. If you multiply that by the 2.5 million population here, that is a lot of travel we are doing as a community. We are, of the 4 large metropolitan areas, we have the highest VMT per capita. The question is, can our infrastructure support this? Next slide. So what does the plan do then? The plan lays out a path for us to have more homes near major job centers. The purpose is to make your commute shorter so that if there is a housing, there is a corresponding jobs, you don't have to travel 30 miles to get to your job. It is within a sustainable community. It also gives you more ways to get around. It's not just focusing on cars. We try to find a way for different mobility options for any walks of people, whatever their choice is. And we have to protect our farmland. We have to make sure that we achieve, above all, our target greenhouse gas and our air quality emissions. Specifically for transportation, next slide, please. We want to make sure that to attain our air quality, what do we do in the transportation? Because SAGOG is, after all, a transportation planning agency. We provide more transit options. We want to shorten the disparity between different walks of people. Whether you want to take transit or you want to bike or you want to scooter everywhere or you just want to spend less time in traffic. And above all, if we can just travel less, like if your school and your hospital and your recreational facilities are near your housing and not 30 miles away from you, that is the purpose of the plan. We want to get there. That will not only help us to travel less and improve our quality, but will also help us to attain our air quality standards better. Next slide, please. So how do we get there? The plan is divided into 5 major parts. The first part is the economic forecast or the growth forecast. Think of it as when you're designing a building, we are thinking of how high or how many stories we need to plan. So this will tell you what would be the future growth in the region in terms of population, in terms of jobs, in terms of housing and all those needs. And that's our control total. So that will be the highest we will ever reach in our plan horizon. Then the second layer is we find the land use forecast. This is where you have the most input in. This is where I encourage you to have the most conversation with your local agencies, because the root, the first step and the most impactful place for attaining an air quality is at the land use. Better our land use forecast, the better our air quality will be. And this is done at a local level with your local agencies. And we collaborate with the local agencies and we take the input from them and we forecast it. And then we follow that with forecasting our revenue. We project what is the revenue that is reasonable to assume in 20 years based on all the things that we have. And then we take the land use and the revenue and say, of course, we are not going to have all the money in the world to do everything we want. What is the best and effective way of distributing the money so that the region has a connection between the land use that is going to happen in the region and the transportation needs of the people? So after this is the performance outcome, which is the fourth part. This is the most important part where we usually at SACO hold our breath and just wait eagerly for. We try, combine the land use, the forecast, everything, and then we see if the performance outcome will help us attain all the air quality, the state regulations, the federal requirements, if we all meet all of that. If we do, then we go out and celebrate. No, I'm kidding. There's a lot more work after that. If we do, then we have met half of our goal. We follow through with the policies and strategy. But if we do not meet the performance, then we go back to the top of the drawing board. We have to then go back and say, what can we do in terms of our land use forecast? What can we do in terms of transportation? So the better our land use forecast is, the less we have to keep going back to the table and imposing new regulations or new mandates on the transportation. But if it doesn't help us get there to achieve our greenhouse gas and our air quality, then we talk about, okay, can we talk about telework? Okay, how can we have some kind of discussion on what are some possible options? Maybe more transit will help us get there. That will move more people from roads or cars onto other modes of transportation. So these are all questions we ask at that point. But like I said earlier, the best way is to invest in a wonderful land use pattern that helps us to have a closer, connected community at a grassroots level. Next slide, please. So in this particular plan cycle, we are focusing more on decreasing the disparity among all walks of people, whether it is racial equity, whether it is income equity, whether it is age-related disparity. So we would like to make sure that this is a plan that meets a need of all the people in the region. And we would also like to make sure that we improve the safety of the region. We can meet the air quality and all kinds of environmental standards. We want to make sure that we have a prioritized list of projects ready for funding opportunities whenever they come from. And above all, we want it to be underlaid with the idea that the whole plan is built on building more economic prosperity in the region. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Miles to talk about how this all ties in with at a federal level.
Friends, thanks for having me. I always really enjoy interacting with folks from your region. I've been to every major metropolitan area in all 50 states, and yours is definitely one of my absolute favorites. So as soon as all this is done, let's get together in person. I'm Miles Keogh. I'm the executive director of the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, which is 155 local and state clean air and climate agencies that implement the Clean Air Act that are spread around the country. And we're very happy and proud to have not just Sacramento, but several agencies in your region, Eric's and others, as members of NACA. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NACs. We had a really great discussion just now where some important concepts were introduced by David and Binu, and I really loved how articulate they were about some of these issues. What I'm going to do is just take a little step back and talk a little bit about especially ozone and what the NACs, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, are for that, what the process is that is currently underway to set the health-based standard for that. I'll also just incidentally touch on particulates. I know that ozone is the greater concern for y'all, but particulates are terrible for human health, and so they're in the same bucket here as well. So I'll touch on that as well. So just taking a step to understand how did we get here? The Clean Air Act asks EPA to look at the science, to look at health-based science, and to do an assessment of what's the level of exposure at different time frames at which human health and the environment is negatively impacted. How much can we stand to be around, and for how long for each of these different kinds of pollutants? While greenhouse gases are really important, and it's essential that the rest of the country take on some of the leadership that your community has shown on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and continues to show in that respect. In point of fact, for the NACs, greenhouse gases aren't among the regulated pollutants that fit into that arena. So keep doing what you're doing, but that's why I'm not talking about greenhouse gas emissions in this moment right now. The way that EPA figures out the health-based standards is they assemble a group called the CASAC, the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee. And that group is sort of the A-list, the Sacramento Kings, if you will, of really top-notch scientific minds, including regulators, scientists, academics, epidemiologists, toxicologists, the whole shebang. They get together and they put together reports called the Integrated Science Assessment and the Policy Assessment for the regulated pollutants. The two that I'm going to talk right now about, we'll start with particulates because they're super important, and they'll affect Sacramento, but they're not the main topic of conversation for today. The CASAC has been reformed in this administration. It is meeting in late November and early December to reconsider the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the NACs, for particulates, for PM 2.5 and PM 10. PM 2.5 being the one of special interest. Right now, the NACs, they're looking at lowering the annual exposure level. Right now, it's set at 12 micrograms per cubic meter. Thank you, Don. And the expectation is that the CASAC, as they do their integrated science assessment, looking at all the best science and determining what that says about the effects on health, it looks like they'll steer it down to about 10 micrograms per cubic meter, although 8 or 9 are on the table. And at that level, that would really start to factor into decisions that are being made in places like Sacramento, which are not right now in that situation, but that would inch y'all closer. It's also worth noting, PM 2.5 is a killer. You want it as low as possible. So you definitely, if the science says that it's 8 or 9, you definitely want to do that for the health and well-being of your constituents and citizens and yourselves. On ozone, the last time the ozone standard was addressed, was revisited, was in 2015. It was set to 70 parts per billion. In the first term of the Obama administration, it was set at 75 parts per billion. In the second, it was set at 70 parts per billion. And that's where we are now. In the Trump administration, the CASAC got together and decided to leave that standard at 70 parts per billion. There were a lot of criticisms of the process that was used by that CASAC to make the decision to hold it at 70. There were rules passed limiting the science. There was a suppression of technical and scientific integrity among the decision making. There was a lot of questions about the validity of that process. NACA actually said that regardless of what the outcome was, the process needed to be revisited because it was, as the kids say when they're playing Among Us, it was sus and needed to be revisited. So just today, just this morning, the media is reporting that EPA officials told the American Lung Association that they will that EPA will be revisiting the ozone standard. So the two possibilities were to just start the process now and keep it within the every 5-year cycle, or to revisit the process and get in there a little bit earlier. Would probably, if they come in and reconsider it, which it sounds by today's media reports that they will get in and reconsider it, that puts it probably on track for a change in the NAAQS to be effective by 2023 instead of by 2025, which is the normal cycle. It's a 5-year cycle of revisiting these NAAQS. Right now, as I said, it's set to 70 parts per billion. And according to the media reports today, 60 parts per billion is on the table for consideration. That there is scientific basis for considering something lower than 70. And there are studies out there that would push it as low as 60. I don't think it'll get any lower than 60. I actually don't personally believe that it'll get down to 60, but we should do what science says is the right thing to do. We should use the scientific process and let that drive what our decision-making is around what's safe for our families and communities. If the ozone standard is revisited, once the standard is set, EPA has a year to go out and using monitoring data from folks like Sacramento Metro Air District and Placer County AQMD and the other air agencies, they have a year to go out and look at the data and determine who's in and who's out, who's attaining and who ain't. And once those designations are done, then the states, it wouldn't be Sacramento, it would be the states, but working closely with those local districts would have 3 years to create state implementation plans that are built to different kinds of measures that help get you from where you ain't to where you need to be. So that would put some time. It would be about 4 years in total from the time the data is reset to when the plans are turned in for us to really know where we're going to land up with this thing. That sounds like a lot of time, but as David and Binu will tell you, when you're building a highway, it's nothing. It flies. It requires a ton of coordination. It requires a lot of different goals, environmental justice goals, climate goals, criteria pollutant goals, economic development goals, job growth goals, all kinds of goals, mobility goals, innovation goals to all get harmonized and put into place. So it will be a tall lift, but also I've worked with folks in your area before, and if y'all can't do it, I don't think it can be done. You've got the best and the brightest there, and I have confidence that there are ample capacities among folks in your region to do this skillfully. I'm happy to take questions. I know it's a little high level, but I guess with that, I'll turn it over back to Eric. Are you next?
I think we have Don Saylor, who's gonna wrap this up, and then Heidi will go ahead and field questions. So thank you, Miles.
Thanks, Miles, and thanks to everyone on the panel. This has been a very informative presentation so far, and I'm really looking forward to the questions that folks bring. Before I start my portion here, I want to thank all of the folks who participated in the Cap to Cap effort this week. It's a challenge to do this virtually, but I think it's been working very well. So the folks who planned it, who coordinated it, thanks for all your efforts on logistics and bringing it together. If you think about this for just a second, this can get pretty dry and pretty deep pretty quickly if you're not kind of steeped in these processes. But if you think about it, about 5 years ago or so, most of us didn't follow the daily air quality index. It wasn't at our fingertips. We didn't know how to do it. Nobody had a purple gauge in our neighborhoods. But now, before we leave the house in the morning, we're not just looking at what the temperature is going to be like, if we need to wear a raincoat or not. Most of us are taking a look at that at the air quality index. And I want you to know it's green today, tomorrow's yellow, and it's going to be green through next Tuesday. I looked up before I got out of the house this morning. So we're in good time right now. But it is easy to get caught up with the technical stuff here. But what matters most is the health of our communities, and air quality is a pretty serious thing. And it also affects the competitiveness of our region. I'll talk about that in a second. And I'm going to be speaking today primarily about my role from my role as a member of the Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors. But if you think about this for a second, air quality hurts us. I'm also a member of other organizations. The air basin that includes Yolo County has not met federal air quality standards since 2013. That's 8 years and running. Bad air hurts. Studies have found that high childhood asthma incidence among children living near freeways without appropriate mitigations is becoming a serious issue for us. We know that our current environment is impacting health in our region based on the community health needs assessments done by our medical systems, Kaiser and Sutter, Dignity, and county public health teams. We also know that these impacts hit hardest in under-resourced neighborhoods. Lifespan and health are linked to zip code, and air quality is one of the factors that varies by zip codes. Many of you who've been participating in the cap-to-cap efforts this week have been involved in looking at the state's community air protection program to support community-led air monitoring efforts in communities in our region. For our region to be its best self, to compete with other high-performing regions around the world, we must drive our decisions and make investments in cleaner air to assure we have a healthy workforce, thriving communities, a prosperous economy, and environmental justice, and avoid additional regulations that will come by taking reasonable actions now. So I mentioned that we all are involved in multiple things. I'm a Yolo County supervisor. I get involved in land use planning and policy and a bunch of other things. And as a member of that board, I have the privilege of serving on a number of other boards. I chair the Yolo Bus Board, the Yolo County Transportation District, and the Capital Corridor Passenger Rail Service. I've been a board member of SACOG since 2008 and a board member of the Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District since 2011. I'm a founding member of the Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors, and I chair the Yolo County Climate Compact. And I'm sharing these roles not to list a resume, but because they interact. Everything we do, whether we're in business or we're in a public sector role, the roles that we play overlap. We need to see all of our efforts as integrated and overlapping as we address the future of our region. It's sort of like interlocking gears. They all need to turn in sync. So cleaner energy is a critical piece of this interlocking regional gear system. The move toward local community choice aggregation programs that I'm going to touch on is part of the air quality solution. In 2002, coming off of some of the crises that happened in the late 90s in California, the legislature enacted legislation to establish community choice aggregation programs. And the idea is that customers can choose whether to participate or not. There's increased reliance on renewable sources, local control and accountability, and all at competitive rates. That's the idea. And Valley Clean Energy in Yolo County is our response to that opportunity. We set ourselves up in 2017. It was Yolo County and the city of Davis initially. Woodland joined in the first year, and Winters came the next year. We launched our service in 2018. Probably many of you are aware of what CCAs are like. We purchase electrons, and it's transmitted over the infrastructure of the investor-owned utility, in our case, PG&E. I want to say it's such a delight to have this opportunity to thank Heidi and the SMUD folks, because SMUD has been a key partner in Valley Clean Energy. SMUD has done, they're one of the, I think the nation's #1 public utility, and they've been able to provide us with the backroom support to enable us to operate Valley Clean Energy. Valley Clean Energy is one of 23 CCAs in California, and together we serve 11 million customers, and that includes about 50% of all of the customers in the PG&E service territory. In addition to Valley Clean Energy, our region is served by Pioneer Community Energy in Placer County. And in January 2022, Pioneer will expand service to include El Dorado County and the city of Placerville. To date, our CCAs, these 23 agencies, have collectively contracted for more than 6,000 megawatts of new clean generation capacity through long-term power purchase agreements with terms of 10 years or more. Valley Clean Energy has exceeded our goals for renewable carbon-free power and is expanding renewable energy portfolio with a focus on electricity from local producers, including a hydroelectric facility at the Indian Valley Reservoir just over the Yolo County line. That's a very nice little co-benefit thing because it's owned and operated by the Yolo Flood Control and Water Conservation District. So we're able to give them another funding source and provide some electrical power. Most of the air quality impacts from Valley Clean Energy efforts are felt not right here locally in our region, but they're felt where the electrical power is generated. Of course, if you have more renewable mix, we are contributing to the larger issue. But we're buying energy from Kern County, Kings County, San Bernardino County, Sutter County, and Yolo County with our own generation facilities. So there's air quality reductions in those areas because of the reduced demand on higher polluting power plants. The California state requirement is for 47% of our energy supply statewide to be renewable by 2025. Here's some data for you. In 2020, PG&E was 29% renewable. SMUD was 34% renewable. The power mix that Valley Clean Energy provided to our customers was 44% renewable. The target is 47% by 2025. Over the past few months, we've signed contracts to bring our electrical mix to 57% renewable energy by 2023 and 85% in 2024. Our target is 100% carbon-free by 2030. Changes in the federal regulations and the federal targets that were described by Miles, I think are really interesting to consider. If there's a proposed change in PM 2.5, for example, from the 35 on a 24-hour period to 30 or 25, that's if the science supports that, I think it's not a bad thing for our region, so long as it comes with greater federal investments in mobility and alternatives for mobility and a renewed emphasis on vehicle emissions. The greatest source of air pollution in our region is mobile sources. And so with wood smoke in the wintertime is another contributor. But if we can spur automakers to produce cleaner vehicles and move our transit fleet to cleaner vehicles, that's the only way we're going to be able to move ahead. The real bang for the buck is at the federal level. And we've got some work to do there. The challenges that we're facing are not within jurisdictional boundaries or siloed efforts. It's not one agency, it's not one business, it's all of us together, and we all need to do our part. As individuals and leaders in our various sectors, if you're in business, you're in conversations all across the region, from Greater Sacramento to the Metro Chamber to Valley Vision, every part of the work that we do together needs to have a lens on what's happening with our ability to move around, with our ability to have a healthy workforce, to have people be able to show up, not sitting at home because of air quality challenges. We need to purchase less energy, purchase cleaner energy, reduce travel and single occupancy gas-powered vehicles, use alternative and cleaner transportation modes, and as Binu suggested, support compact communities and walk, bike-friendly land use planning. We are in this together for sure. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you so much, Don, for all of that. And of course, Schmidt is delighted to be a support team to your CCA, as we are to also Alameda's and several others. So we're doing our part to try and help communities have their own CCA system if that's what they so choose. So now, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. But I did want to start with David. There was a question that I had for you on, I think it was slide 7. You had the pie charts about where the sources of air pollution are coming from. And the chart on the right listed 17% are coming from consumer products. That's a field I happen to work in my day job, and I'm very curious if we can control it in any way. What type of consumer products are you referring to so people know what products to avoid if they want to help us meet our air quality standards?
So consumer products is anything that we could buy off the store. So these are products that, like, hairsprays and things like that, where it's used for good kind of daily lives, and these are regulated by the state through their it's a statewide consumer products regulations, and they have standards for those. So yeah, it's just products that you buy off stores, these get used and things like that. So it's in anything that it's like aerosol based, it emits VOCs.
So mostly aerosols that emit VOCs is the big issue.
Yes.
Okay, that's good for me to know, because I'm actually working on a whole aerosol container policy right now, because they're also a very big waste problem because they're pressurized. So maybe we should have a separate conversation about that later. And it sounded from what Binu said that really the big issue is land use. If we get the land use right, a lot of other things are going to follow to get us into compliance. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a very, difficult and political situation, because there's a lot of big investors that buy large swaths of land and then want to profit from that land, and then put a lot of pressure for development on that land. And sometimes it's not in a core area. So that's just something I think we all have to think about when those land use decisions are being made. They really could affect air quality for a long time to come. And that's a very big area of, it's always a big discussion on how to use our land properly. So I guess I don't see any questions in the chat. Are there any questions? I guess I'll ask one more. What happens when the new technologies affecting transportation or energy generation rapidly expand? Is the modeling able to keep up, or are they behind? Maybe this is for Miles.
Totally awesome question, because what you've just described is inevitable, right? There was a UK statistician who said all models are wrong, good models are useful. Or maybe more succinctly, the great boxer Mike Tyson said, everyone goes into the ring with a plan until they get punched in the face. And what we discover is that these plans are going to get surprised by technology and by innovation. And that's kind of awesome. There are factors that are predictable in this, and there are factors that are real wild cards. And I would suggest making a good plan helps you make the best decisions under conditions of uncertainty that you possibly can. But y'all should understand that these great plans that David and Binu and Heidi and everybody are coming up with, they're going to be wrong. That's okay. They're good plans, and so they're useful in decision making. I think a couple big wild cards that are out there are extremely uncertain right now. One is the disposition of funding to support work, as Don absolutely appropriately said, the disposition of funding to help us all meet the goals that are out there. There's a huge pot of money that's being considered in a couple pieces of legislation on the Hill right now. The reconciliation approach in the Build Back Better bill has billions of dollars of investment for replacement of electric vehicles, improvement of the power grid, transformation of the generation sector to clean sources, lots of different stuff. The infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure framework that's also riding alongside with that in a sidecar has billions of dollars for electric transmission and for clean air at schools and for infrastructure improvements that reduce idling time and research and development in truck technology that'll help in this respect. And so that's a wild card. Is that going to pass? Because if it does pass, then that certainly puts the thumb on the scale for clean technologies to come in that'll really help things out. Another question that's an unknown will be the topic of discussion in Glasgow, Scotland, starting next week. What happens in Glasgow isn't a wild card, but the topic that they're talking about is, y'all know way better than I do that the wildfires seem to be getting worse, that the ozone season seems to be getting longer, that the climate is affecting our ability to afford good public health protection in these conditions. It's undermining those things. So how bad is that going to get? We don't know. We can model it. But like I said, all models are wrong. Good models are at least useful.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I somebody put in the chat from the chamber, this is a great one. We just passed a bill in California that's basically going to ban the landscaping equipment fueled by fossil fuels by 2024, at least the sales of them. And we're getting national news, about that. Do you foresee that becoming a national standard or something along those lines? And how much do you think that's going to improve our air? Since I've seen charts from CARB that say that we're literally right about at the cross point where they're actually going to surpass cars as the largest emitters of pollution here in the valley, like blowers and mowers.
I'm going to answer that if that's okay. My interaction with Adrian and the gang here from Valley Vision, the folks who've been engaged on Cap to Cap coming, the other cap in Cap to Cap is here, right? So keep doing what you're doing. It does affect policy. It does introduce the pioneering work that y'all are doing in the Golden State into the marketplace of ideas. And that does set goalposts for where national policy will go. Sometimes we don't get everybody there. We get some of us there. We get a lot of us most of the way there. Will it have an impact on air pollution that makes a difference? This whole thing, the climate change thing, the air pollution thing, it's all a game of inches, right? There's no magic bullet in this thing. We're going to have to go block by block on this thing and chip away with every possible approach we possibly can. And a lot of these things are job creators. A lot of these things yield economic development. They yield better cut grass, So, there's a lot of upsides in these if we can continue to have conversations around, well, do these things cut my grass better? Are these things upsides disguised as, reactions to challenges? I think the way that we introduce as many of those strategies into the marketplace of ideas as we can is y'all keep doing these things, keep bringing those ideas to Washington, keep engaging with folks like Don and Eric White, keep bringing me out to Sacramento whenever we can. We'll just keep talking this thing through, and that'll shift out what works and what doesn't. Hopefully we'll put enough good solutions on the table so that we get where we need to go.
Can I make a comment on this one?
Please go ahead.
I think that this, we sometimes get bogged into how do we account for some source? How do we get credit for taking some action? It's credit in a bureaucratic way, credit in whether we're meeting some target or not meeting it or advancing. I think we're kind of beyond that in my assessment. We are no longer dealing with exceptional events because exceptional events happen all the time. Our weather patterns have become less predictable and more extreme. when we have months of time when the air quality is suffering because of wildfires, it's no longer an exceptional event. So we have to take the steps, the small ones and the big ones, to move us forward, or we're gonna falter. So part of this, I guess, what I'm trying to say is we got to get past a game of accounting and into the true purpose of making sure our communities are livable, that people can move about, that our region is prosperous. And I think Jim's got a question that I want to get to about how business can be involved in that.
Yeah, I guess I'll just wrap up this part by saying also, I think we need to think about why are we building with lawns? I mean, we have a severe drought,
Right.
And we also have a biodiversity problem. We're losing our birds, bees, butterflies, pretty much everything. And it's because we're landscaping with bluegrass
water.
from Kentucky.
And the water demand for that is not very productive.
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead to Jim's question then? How can business best engage in these important conversations affecting them? Excellent question, of course, coming from Jim, who works very closely with our chambers and others. Don, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I think that business leaders are just that. They're role models, and we have a region full of active businesses: Nugget Markets, Rayleigh's Markets, Sutter, Dignity. These businesses, Sutter Hospital in Davis is doing a remodeling and expansion. They're putting in a massive photovoltaic array. Bogle Wines in Clarksburg have a massive photovoltaic array that powers much of their operation. They want a windmill that will do some more. A small farm, Full Belly Farms in Cape Bay Valley, powers their entire packing shed using solar on top of their roof. Businesses are people we look to. The greatest businesses are the ones that are already our leaders in this, and we need to hear more about their stories. I think the other piece is business leaders engaged in conversations like this across the region are really valuable. If any of you are involved in a business in Yolo County and you want to be a part of the Valley Clean Energy Community Advisory Committee, we have 2 vacancies right now, and we would love to have you step forward and be a part of those conversations. It's not executives hundreds of miles away making decisions in the abstract. It's the fact that every one of the business leaders in our region are already actively engaged in our communities, and simply having the conversation and taking your own actions within your own spheres is where we need you.
I think you said that beautifully. And I can say for our businesses listening that on the SMUD website, we've got a whole page just for businesses, all the incentives we're offering. We have free energy assessments that will give you a whole report on what you can do, where the rebates are, what's your return on investment for helping us, because we do see this as a partnership as well. It's always going to be a partnership. And thanks to everybody who's already done a lot to help us.
And
Would any of the other panelists like to speak, Bina?
Yeah, and I would like to add that the best place to start this conversation would be at your local agency level, because that's where things happen, especially at a land use level, at a transportation level, everything. The conversation, not just the conversation, but the happening place is at the local agency level. So be engaged in what's happening in your community, and your local offices. That's what I would say would be the start, because anything that SACOG does or any of the other agency does, we collect all the information from there as our starting point. Everything is built on from the local agency level. So that's where you should have your first level information.
Most of you are involved in chamber organizations. Our Metro Chamber, definitely be a part of those government relations conversations on these topics. Look for ways to thread the needle and have win-wins, not just don't just always focus on what's a job killer bill and what's going to focus on how we can create a solution together. And there are state and federal advocacy efforts that you're all involved in. And those efforts can also include a greener future.
Oh, and SMUD has a business advisory group as well. Didn't want to make sure we said that. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to that? Eric or anybody? Okay. So we've got another question from Evan Schmidt from Valley Vision. What are some focal points for rural communities that have a different profile of issues than the cities or the urban areas? Anybody want to try to tackle that?
Well,
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Oh, go ahead, Don. I'll defer to you to kick off.
well, one of the slides, I think that maybe it was Binu had showed that 90% of our people live in urban areas and 10% live in rural, but 80% of our land is in rural. So what we don't necessarily need to have a bus system that goes to every rural community, but we need to have mobility access and access from those rural settings. We need to have kind of balanced, reasonable approaches to stationary air quality sources in rural areas. We can't require reasonably people to replace a pump that's used 25 days of a year, especially if they're doing so. I'd like to have us look at ways of having sort of a either or approach. If somebody's going to install a massive photovoltaic array that takes most of their electric load, we shouldn't require them to replace a pump that they're using 20 days a year because of its age solely. So we've got to have reasonable solutions that business and farmers and rural people can say, okay, that makes sense, I'll do that. So I think those are a couple of thoughts. We've got to provide in Valley Clean Energy's world, we're looking to provide an electrical supply that is cost effective, because farmers don't care if their primary thing is this going to be an input that I can afford. And so we've got to have reasonable solutions and practical things that people can respond to.
Thanks a lot. That was great. I would actually ask Binu to she's probably best versed on transportation differences between rural and urban areas. But before maybe she says something, I will tell you from experience that we've seen, electricity reliability, right? So we live in a world now with PSPS events. We also live in a state where there's a strong push towards electrification. And so, I would say that as we think about our rural areas, we're asking on one hand to electrify everything, and then we live in a system where that electricity reliability is not always there. And so while that may not be as big of an issue in, say, Roseville or Sacramento County, certainly in the outlying areas, and Don's probably familiar with his growers and residents in Yolo County, having lights to turn on when it gets windy is a challenge, right? And so that is something that we have to figure out how to solve. And as we have conversations about moving advanced technologies, we cannot forget that a reliable source of electricity is critical for those technologies being deployed successfully in rural areas.
I can add quickly that I think PG&E is doing a lot with virtual power plants, as are we, because that's one of the ways to create reliability, even in wind events, where people can create their own power locally and use it amongst themselves. Binu, did you want to speak to this?
Sure. I can start off. There's a lot of things that's going through my head right now. I'm like, this is the conversation I was waiting for, but I also know we are at time. So I'll just summarize one or two things. The needs of the rural is so different from urban, but there are some things that are similar to both. I would say that if somebody from a rural agency need to go visit a hospital or check with a doctor or something, they are instantly going to have a longer trip than somebody who lives in an urban area. One of the things that will help them not have to put in another 30 miles to go to a hospital or see a doctor is a broadband, is a reliable broadband. I know Valley Vision is talking about that. So that is a great place. Do you really need to commute 30, 40 miles, or can you do half your work? We all learned during the pandemic that working from home or doing things business from home, even doctor appointments from home, these are all possible. So I think that will help our transportation a lot. The second thing is that while we focus on zero emission vehicles in the urban areas, a lot of the agricultural farm vehicles are gas guzzlers, and they are probably a little bit more older technology, cleaner vehicles for them that, as Supervisor Saylor said, that are affordable. That is a key. Then we have a whole, let's say, rural-urban connection plan, RUCS, which SACOG is focused on. We have a whole strategy, and I think Renee is on the panel here. She can go days talking about it. So if she has something to add on, I will call on her as the project manager of RUCS. But there is a whole lot of strategy that is just dedicated for rural that needs to be talked about, which is so different from urban.
Great. Well, I think this has been for me, it's been very, very informative. I always love moderating panels because I think I learn more than I give. But I want to start by thanking Eric and David, and Bino, Miles, and Don so much for all your time and energy putting into this, and to the Chamber for hosting this policy discussion today on air quality. And I, before I turn it over to Evan, just say from SMUD, we really appreciate everybody talking, working together, because again, as a community, it's going to take all of us working together to solve these problems. It's not going to be any one group solving it alone. So with that, thank you again. And I'll turn it over to Evan Schmidt from Valley Vision to close us out. Evan?
Well, hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. And I have the good fortune of just swooping in at the last minute after this fabulous panel has really said everything that there is to say. This has been incredibly informative, and really want to thank all of you experts as well as the audience for listening in. So I guess what I can do is just reflect a little bit on what I've heard throughout this session, starting with really the role of air quality planning in our region and all the complexity that goes into that, into understanding where emissions are coming from and creating meaningful programs and policy in order to ensure that we're on a good path of improving air quality in our region. And the very strong role that transportation has in that, and not only transportation planning, but understanding that that's a huge source of our air pollution emissions in the region, and that the choices that we make around transportation and land use are incredibly important to our air quality. Finally, it was really important to understand the federal landscape on air quality standards and what some of the trends are around where policy is going and how that might impact our planners, but also our businesses and our individuals in our region, and most importantly, our health and the health of our communities, and really knowing and understanding how important air quality is at all of those levels. Finally, thinking about how do we support a green energy future, and all the different roles and types of organizations that there are that can help do that. And it was great hearing from Don about Valley Clean Energy and the work that's happening there. So I think I'll just wrap up by saying it was very clear to me through this panel that we all really have a stake in this. Clean air is important to our health, to equity in our region, and to the prosperity of our region. And just as we all have a stake in this, we also all have a role. So thinking about business leaders and the role that business leaders have in decision making that is going on, as well as being a role model and engaging in this conversation, all the way down to the individual decisions that we all make every day about how we get around the region, and how we source our energy and all of that. So really just a very comprehensive look at all the issues around air quality and the way that it affects us in our day-to-day lives, and the very important focus that we have as a region on advocating for and working towards cleaner air. So I just really want to thank all the panelists and the presenters, thank the audience, and thank the Chamber for bringing us all together. This has been a fabulous week so far, and looking forward to our last day of Cap to Cap tomorrow.
Thank you, Evan. Bye, everybody. Great to see you.
Bye.
See all you.
We're closing in on the end of the
Bye.
week. Don't miss our closing session tomorrow with United States Senator Alex Padilla.